Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Clarity from Chaos. I'm your host, Dave Campbell. On this episode, we're going to be examining the radicalization of our electorate and how to stop it, how progressives have taken Marxism and turned it into a very sellable notion. In addition, we are going to be discussing the use of activist judges by the progressives and how they are reshaping our political landscape. With the exception of a few politicians, we are now living in a country which is devoid of understanding history. We are now engaged in a conflict to restrict the country from becoming a nuclear threat to countries not only in the Middle East, but to Europe and the rest of the world, because the rest of the world's ideology does not match theirs. Iran was just weeks away from becoming that nuclear threat. But for the grace of God, we had a president with the conviction to not let that happen. In the face of a Neville Chamberlain media and politicians whose only purpose is to rail against Donald Trump and not to focus on what is correct for the United States, we, the electorate, need to do better. We need to do a much better job of electing our representation, as shown by the current news and a perfect example in California, who elected a congressman with the character of a slug. Not that I have anything against slugs, but now the media is finally reporting on his true character, and fortunately he resigned from Congress in the California gubernatorial race. But this is only one example. We have to examine these candidates much more closely. 2, we need to hold them accountable. And lastly, it is my belief we need to hold an Article 5 convention and impose term limits on our politicians. To help navigate these complex topics, I am incredibly pleased to welcome back to the show who has deep expertise in all of these fields and is the best-selling author of Progressive Prejudice, Exposing the Devouring Mother, the Maverick Millennial, Miss Leslie Corbley. Leslie is also the author of Silent Suffering, Poems of Pain and Purpose. She holds a BA in journalism and a JD degree from the University of Oklahoma. Well, welcome to the show, Leslie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure indeed. So let's start out talking about these activist judges, because we just cannot seem to get away from them. And Congress does nothing to impose their will, although they do have the oversight on that.
Sure. So I think that we're living through an interesting time. So you mentioned a lot of things in your introduction that I think are fascinating, because having a well-functioning republic, which is what we started out as, as flawed as we were at our nation's founding, the system was very coherent and worked well, in the sense that I think it worked for the people that it was designed to operate for. And I think we've expanded in some ways, in a good way, the American vision, obviously to include all humanity, in the sense of not having undue prejudice towards different races or gender, so on and so forth. But one thing I think that we've floundered on is character and understanding moral prudence, so to speak. I don't think we have that a lot. And when you talk about things like activist judges, that's what you get when you don't have solid character. It's also what you get from Congress when Congress has decided to have no spine, and they've been abdicating so much authority over the past century, really, especially the second half of the 20th century, that it's really hard to come back from that as an institution.
Yeah, I would say they've been abdicating ever since the early 70s, when you really see the uptick in all of the different agencies. I think.
Yes, but I would argue even before that, because you create all these agencies.
Exactly. No, you're right.
Even during FDR's rule. But again, you can have a lot of what looks like solid congressional action during some of those progressive eras because they're creating these laws that are really hard to roll back. So again, once you start outsourcing and delegating, how do you claw it back? How do you get it back under your control? And the answer is it's just really difficult, if not impossible, to make that work long term. And I think we're facing that. And we're facing also the clash of ideologies that is running into this, right? So you have, and I know it's easy to say activist judges, and there absolutely are activist judges. I'm not negating that. But the reality is you have fracturing of moral and ideological positions in society, which means we have many more flavors of ideologies out there than we used to. Right. I mean, back in the early 90s, or even if you go back to the 1800s, part of the 20th century,
Right.
it's not that people didn't have esoteric views, but you didn't have the same fracturing of ideologies that you have now that is much more, we're much more divided in that way. You used to have several different worldviews that competed in the U.S., broader U.S. culture for dominance. And now you have a bunch of different little flavors of those. I mean, you even look at the Republican and Democratic parties, and they're not nearly as united as they were 50, 60, 70 years ago. And that's because of that.
And to that point, I would argue that it's basically boiled down to a uniparty at this point, because you can't hardly distinguish one from the other.
Well, that's what's interesting, because I think of it more almost as like the moralistic, maybe the atheistic. That's not a good way of framing it. But the way I think of it is you have these moral systems that aren't rooted to traditionalism, and those are starting to fracture just the way traditionalism fractured with, say, the Protestant Revolution, right? So you have all these ideologies that are similar. Like that's what unites those, quote unquote, on the right. They have some underpinnings that are similar. Again, rough analogy would be like the Nicene Creed or something. Something that pretty much any Christian could come on board with. But then you have different ones that rank order their priorities very differently, right? So you have the more conservative wing that might really value abortion, and the other wing of the Republican Party doesn't care about that. And you have the same with the Democratic Party. Maybe some people really, really care about the issue of environmentalism, but others care more about some other pet issue that matters more. Maybe it's critical race theory. I don't know, whatever it is. And so it makes it really hard to tell where people's actual lines are in the sand when it comes to negotiating or what they value most. And so it tends to be, where are the flashpoints in an election cycle? And that's why elections can be so disruptive right now and very unpredictable, because you don't know where the flashpoints are going to be. And that's why you would have, I think, sometimes the attempt to manipulate them, right? We're gonna release this clip about Donald Trump saying something perceived to be derogatory about women, to grab them by the, remark that we are very familiar with. Doesn't need to be repeated, but we're going to do that right before the election, because that's some people's really big issue, and it might sway a bunch of voters one way or another. So again, I think that some of this comes from incoherence in the mind of the electorate. Like, I don't think we have solid character, and I think solid character comes from internal coherence, right? Even if you have breaks from that character, there's internal coherence there, and I don't think we have that. So an example, for example, you might take someone like John F. Kennedy, who was a great president, like one of the great presidents of the 20th century. And obviously he's no saint, in a lot of ways. You can look at him and you can see that he's not a saint. But there's internal coherence and character there, right? Like that we don't have now.
Yeah, but and it's interesting you brought that up, because I was just going to mention Thomas Jefferson.
Yes. Yeah, he's another Thomas
Jefferson. Yeah, Jefferson was not. I mean, he was not. The choir boy. He was an interesting personality. But what I think with those gentlemen, with JFK and several of the other, I think what distinguished them was that it was country first. They had all of their flaws, their faux pas, their mistresses, their this, their that. But I think the overriding, and you can certainly comment to, I think that I get the sense that the overriding component that made them great, that gelled them into who they were, was they focused on the country first. They had go ahead.
I think it's even more, not profound than that, but deeper than that. I think there was just more social coherence that was expected of leaders.
Well,
right?
But I think the church drove a lot of that, right?
Because it did.
At the very beginning, the church was the baseline for just about everything that we see legalistically, right?
Well,
I mean, there's
the moral and
right.
philosophical systems is where that came from.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
But that's what I'm getting at is that when you don't like, you're going to always have in leaders, no matter how great,
Sure.
you're going to have deviance in character, and you're going to have people who do things they shouldn't be
Sure.
doing. And that's, I think, to be expected. It's not great, but it's to be expected. I think you see a different quality of that now is what I mean. I don't think that when you don't have a common thread in your culture of what is and isn't in the boundaries of acceptable,
Right. Right.
then you really run into problems. And that's, I think, where we're at. We don't actually have a common coherent framework for what is and isn't moral, for how we should interpret different actions that people take and the severity attached to deviance from those actions, right? I think most people, for example, think of affairs as problematic. I don't think most people are championing having extramarital relationships. But I don't think that we
It
attach
doesn't
this.
yeah, it doesn't rise to the disqualifier point, right? It
Yeah.
go ahead. It's
Well, I think
a
that
go ahead.
it's just that doesn't rise to this qualifier factor. I think it's that we don't have context for what these mean. And what I mean by that is understanding how someone's flaws operate in a sort of coherent fashion. So it's like, take someone like JFK. I think there's aspects in which he had really, I think it'd be hard to argue he didn't have a really strong character. I think far beyond the character of the average politician now. It doesn't mean that in other ways he wasn't deeply flawed. But I think now we sort of, I just don't think we have a lot of common understandings of words that are really important for a culture and a country. Things like, what does it mean to be honorable? What does it mean to be charitable? What does it mean to put others above yourself? What does it mean to honor the duties of your office? These are things I just don't
Yeah.
think we have a lot of
Well,
coherence
yeah,
around.
and I
And
would take
so,
it I would
yeah,
take it a step further and say that there really isn't any authenticity anywhere
yes,
because you could sit there and listen to these individuals and you're thinking to yourself, well, this is a line of BS.
yeah,
I mean, you could see it in their face that that they don't believe what they're saying. And it's the same with the corporate media. I don't think the corporate media is as malicious as everybody seems to think they are, because I think off camera, a lot of these people, if you set them down over a cup of coffee, would be just like anybody else, would have the same questions and everything else, but they're being tasked to do a job because their boss tells them to follow this line or that line or whatever of questioning. And, they're like anybody else. They're self-serving. They're trying to keep their job. Right. And go
well,
ahead.
exactly. So that's where I think that I'm trying to get at this idea that it's a fine point too, because I don't want to negate or
Right. Yeah.
downplay the
Yeah.
severity of offenses that people shouldn't be doing. It's not
Right.
like you don't
Right.
want to say, "Oh, imperfect leaders, they can do whatever they want." That's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really what I'm
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
get at.
No,
But what I'm saying is there
right.
is, I think, a distinct difference from humanity having flaws and the basic reality that power corrupts. I mean, there's a reason you see people higher in power that are more tempted by certain earthly, fleshly desires, right? Like they have opportunity, is what I mean. A lot of normal
Right.
people, frankly, don't. And maybe if they
Right.
had the opportunity, they'd be just as tempted, right? It's that concept of you don't want to think you're above it because most people aren't.
Right.
Given the right
No.
opportunity, most people have
Yeah.
that side to them, and I think it's wise to acknowledge that. But what I'm trying to get at is the concept of character as something that, like, the part of your character that where you go, okay, I have a duty and a responsibility both to myself and to the communal other. It kind of requires you to have a shared moral foundation, is what I'm trying to say, because there
Right.
are what would I would consider to be character flaws that are unique to each person, right? Each person has their little area where they're more tempted. I think there's the have you ever read Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, where it talks
Yes.
about how each person's
Oh, yeah.
proclivities towards doing something wrong are very unique, right? And the
Yep.
devil tempts you according to your own proclivities for evil. So that's
Right.
very true, but it's really hard to distinguish that, I think, in an era where there's no shared moral foundation, because everyone has that. Like everyone has those proclivities and they're not going away ever. but I think we did used to have more of a shared understanding of
Yeah.
what it meant to form a coherent set of beliefs and have integrity and dignity towards standing by those beliefs,
Yep. And
right?
I,
Even when
yeah,
it was hard. That was, I
yeah,
think, a value we've lost.
yeah. And I think that is where Marxism pried open Pandora's box and has utilized what we've just discussed, has utilized that to our own detriment because, they've separated us successfully, or at least somewhat successfully. They've made Christianity a kind of a nasty word, although it's starting to make a comeback. And that's where the moral foundation that you've been talking about basically comes from. And yeah, we all have our own internal little faux pas and everything else. And just like you said, C.S. Lewis wrote a fabulous book explaining how all of that gets exposed and gets you into trouble. And I think, it's just like the women's movement. The women's movement has been very successful in what it's done towards women out there and degrading being a mom to the point of, women are just flat not wanting to be mothers anymore because it's viewed as such a degrading position to be a housewife. And I would argue that that's probably the most powerful position that was ever created was mom, right? Because mom controlled, at least my mom did, she controlled every damn thing between the four walls and the roof. Yeah, my dad was very, very to the forefront. He was, he was a father. But mom ran the ship. You did what mom said you were going to do, and you didn't do it. Then it was the old, well, wait till your dad gets home, and I'm going to turn you over to the Igor coming through the door, at 5 o'clock or whatever it was. So they've been very successful in doing that. And for the life of me, just in today's environment, I can't understand this whole gender thing that's going on and why the moms in this country are not marching on Washington with pitchforks to demand that this silliness stop. And we have an entire political party that's still supporting this nonsense. And I cannot for the life of me understand
I think the
why
gender
is
stuff makes sense, though, when you think about it in context. I'm not saying it makes sense coherently or logically, like with our full understanding of what it is to be a human. Certainly not under a Christian understanding of what it means to be a human. So I don't want to give it that kind of credence, but I think it makes sense from an escapist mindset. So look at it this way: we've given, we've had a lot of like the coherence of the family unit has degraded over time. I think that's pretty simple to say. Most families don't stay together. I think that's a function, but it's interesting. A lot of those on the conservative side. So I practice family law, where I sort of see this on the front end a lot of like people they'll blame no fault divorce for this, saying, well, was it really good to have no fault divorce? And I'm not saying there's no debate to be had there. There's obviously always costs and trade-offs to any policy. But I think one of the simple reasons families don't stay together now is that they can break up. Now that partially is from no fault divorce, right? That allows at least the visual disunity of the family. However, you can look at other eras in history and see that intact families do not equal stability in the home in a culture, right? So you can have a culture, in my view, that's just as, if not more dysfunctional with quote unquote intact families. If your version of intact is that they're legally together, right? And they're forced under the same roof, so to speak. And there's plenty of, I'm sure, sociological data on that and historical data on other time periods, because communism's not new. So if you were to look at other time periods where the family was disintegrating, I doubt that they would have had the same divorce rate, because divorce itself is a different, comes from a different like time in history. So what I'm getting at is the idea that you have a lot of mothers who are raising children alone, and you have a lot of children who are internalizing a model of mom and dad that's outside the home. Now, again, not to knock those who say it, because I think that there is a lot internally could be just as damaging to a child about learning about a model of love when they're in a family where they go, okay, mom and dad are talking a lot about this. Like they're modeling love in a broken way because we're hearing about the ideal of what love should be. And I'm seeing mom and dad model a total opposite reality, right? I think that has its own unique damaging factors. But as it comes to what's going on now with the gender stuff, I don't think it should be shocking. You have a lot of women who are raising children without fathers present at all. I think the role of the father in a lot of ways has been degraded and misunderstood. And by that, I mean, there's a lot of women who do a great job of trying to encourage healthy, good relationships with their children and their fathers. And a lot of women aren't so keen on doing that.
Sure.
And they allow the dysfunction between the parties to interfere with the functioning relationship with the children. And so I think you have a lot of children now who are growing up in an era where sexuality and human identity itself is completely confusing. So again, there's this breakdown of the family. Lace on top of that we have no moral understanding. Our historical understanding is weakening by the day. So a lot of people are pretty rudderless. They have no idea.
Right.
They just really have no idea how the past affects the present. Therefore, they don't understand how that goes into the future, right? Because those are all connected.
And social media steps into the middle of it.
So it's a nightmare. But what I think
Right.
is fascinating, though, because when you look at the trans and the ideologies regarding gender, you notice something really fascinating, which is that they reaffirm biological reality. So, for example, I think what you notice with women is a lot of women are trying to escape being, or girls who do this, I think are trying to escape being perceived as, oh my gosh, am I going to be raped? All these men are going to rape me. They're going to hurt me. If I can step out of that, of what it is to be a woman, because woman is associated with vulnerability, being maybe victimized. Oh my gosh, I can just avoid all of that. I can sidestep the pain of that. I don't have to contend with how to become strong and how to be strong and vulnerable at the same time, which is, I think, a unique element of femininity and womanhood, is how can I be both vulnerable and strong? That's very courageous in a way. It's a unique type of courage that men don't really have to face as much, right? So women bear childbirth, for example. And so I think that a lot of the trans stuff, on my view on that side, is that type of escapism. I just don't even have to worry about that contingency, because if I transition to the other gender, guess what? I get to be a free agent, I get power, I get responsibility, and I don't have to worry about that vulnerability. I think it's the reverse for guys. I think they're trying to escape. They don't want agency, which is fascinating, because I think it shows how sexist in some ways some progressive ideology can be. This idea that womanhood and being a woman makes you have less agency than a man. So I think a lot of the guys who are doing this, I think they want to escape male masculinity, the responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like, I don't want that. That's a lot going on. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to have to do all these things that require so much of me. Oh my gosh, I have to provide for other people. I have all this responsibility. I have to take on this burden of a family, and if I just go into this soft feminine place, I don't have to deal with any of that.
Right.
Right. I can be taken care of.
But to your point, they've so bastardized the definition of a woman, and they've so bastardized what a man is supposed to be. I agree with your analysis, because I've never heard anybody approach it that way. But when you take a step back and think about it, there's a lot of truth to what you've just said, because men are being raised now in a very, very feminine environment. So, the first course of action is, to be masculine. I mean, we hear about toxic masculinity all the time. They're afraid of it. So they, so they look at it and go, well, because they don't know the correct definition of being a woman, they veer the boat that direction, right?
Well, I think I think some of it's to escape being bad. But again, I think that there's something fascinating about it, which shows that they're not just trying to not harm others. I think at least the trans element, isn't just, I don't want to be toxically masculine. It's I think, actual repudiation of what it is to be a man. And that's where I think it's actually shows, in my view, what happens when you remove healthy masculinity from a system. What you're really saying is, we're going to allow predation because, you see these like bathroom incidents, or less bathroom, but especially with young girls in locker rooms with guys. in their teens. I mean, this is not actually what any man that I would imagine that has a young daughter that's going through that, that's a red-blooded, truly protective male is going to go, yeah, that's
Uh-huh.
not happening with my kid.
No,
I'm not doing
no,
that. I don't play that game. Right. And that's
exactly.
where, again, I think that it's this desire to, when you stamp out what is actually healthy in you, there's always a cost to that, right? So that doesn't mean masculinity has to look like every guy being macho and
No,
like Arnold Schwarzenegger. But when you try to deny that categorically, when there is something that's actually real in your biology that's male or female, then there's costs to that.
yeah. And
We have to
and
acknowledge it.
and I would take a step back and I would point my finger at the Now organization for being the root cause of what we've just talked about, because that was their primary purpose. And they've been very successful at doing that. And I think probably the unintended consequences of just empowering women, they've now confused both sexes to the point where we're in a gender discussion now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I don't think they were thinking that far ahead that's where this was going to evolve. But it seems to me, based on our discussion here, that it very, very much makes sense that that's where it has evolved because of the dilution of the definition of the family and the roles in the family and all
Well,
of that.
I think it also comes from, in my view, really elevating. This is a good way to say this, because I think that there's something about being like when it's interesting because I do think women can more easily socially embody masculine traits without it affecting their identity. I think easier than men can embody feminine. Now, let me clarify what I mean by that. What I mean by that is I think there's a lower cost socially to a woman being both effeminate, like wearing nice clothing, being very clearly a girl, and being also very strong
Very
in different
tough.
ways. I don't
Right.
think you can really do the same with a man, right? A
No.
man who's really effeminate, I mean, he's either going to be labeled gay, he might probably will be gay, and or have some of these other problems that exist in the trans realm, right? I think
Right.
what's Christy Nome's husband comes to mind of having,
Exactly.
sort of these sexual fetishes, or I think it's more tied to that for the male experience.
It's a whole RuPaul kind of thing, right?
Yeah, or the individuals with
Yeah,
autogynephilia who have
yeah, yeah,
these sort of
exactly.
like intense urges towards cross-gendered feminization. I
Exactly.
just don't think you get that. I don't think it, which is fascinating though, because I actually think it shows the difference in the sexes. I don't think women are as likely to sexualize their cross-gender ideation as much as men are. That's my view. I could be wrong about that, but my gut instinct is
Yeah.
I don't know of a female equivalent to cross-dressing or autogynephilia, like I mentioned. I'm not familiar with a clinical variation that's similar. I think the female desire to escape their gender, like I said, has more to do with a fear of being preyed on. And I think the male is more afraid of being the prey in some ways, like, oh, I don't want to be toxic. But I think it can also
Right.
transcend that, obviously, as we know from the literature, and it can become tied to the male sex drive itself. And that's where it can become a whole different beast, so to speak, that we're seeing play out a lot now. Because I think that there is, I think, a lot of confusion around the trans issue. But frankly, to be completely honest, I don't think that there's the same safety concerns people have of women transitioning to men as vice versa.
Yeah, I
Right?
would
I mean,
agree with.
do you really think women transitioning to men are interested in going into male locker rooms? Are you concerned that some subpopulation are
No,
trying to get off on that? I don't think anyone thinks that, right?
no.
Whereas I think people implicitly know there's a subpopulation of individuals who are transitioning from male to female who are
Yeah.
absolutely interested in some kind of more nefarious, like there might be a sexual energy behind it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a difference that again reveals the biological reality that we often tried to hide now. And it doesn't mean men are worse than women. It just means males and females aren't the same. I really think that's what it means. Like the bottom line
No,
is they're not the same.
no, and we haven't been the same since day one, right?
Yes.
I mean, we've been different since the beginning. And, I think the unfortunate part is like we've just discussed. And there's been a lot of pressure on this whole idea that we're talking about here. And quite frankly, I don't think we've been equipping our children well enough to deal with that kind of pressure. A, where it comes from, B, what it is, and establishing a baseline for our kids so that they have some place to fall back on besides trying to get a definition from social media about what's going on.
Well, interestingly enough, one of the things that there's a simple way to inoculate kids from a lot of this isn't just to clamp down. Although I have a
No,
toddler and I definitely don't want him to be on social media when he's
no,
young. I think it's really unhealthy. So I'm not trying to say just open season, throw the kids out to the wolves. But I do think that the more kids understand how to face themselves and who they are in the fullness of their humanity. And what I mean by that is to face both their natural proclivities for good and their natural proclivities for evil. Like to
right,
understand where is it that if I were given the opportunity, like what
right,
conditions, under what conditions would I become a monster? Are
right.
really important questions to answer because when you know that, you can protect yourself. And Lord only knows, I think most people throughout the span of their lifetime are a villain in someone's story, right?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
just
Oh,
that's just part of
absolutely.
what it is to be a human. But what I mean is I think that can help people course correct more quickly
Yeah,
because
if people
not facing
are
yourself isn't good.
yeah, if people are interested in a little bit of internal reflection and honesty, I
Yes.
mean, they absolutely have to be honest about it, right? Which seems to be lacking anymore. But then people need to be able to listen without, for the sake of listening, without the sake of judgment.
But that's where, again, I think that actually touches on something earlier that I was trying to get at, which is the difference between viewing yourself as like you need to understand where you both fall short of what's good and where you rise
Right.
above your pain. You need to understand both of these things about yourself
Right.
because you can't grow without that. Like
No.
you're never going to be perfect. That's not really the goal. But I think what you touched on honesty, that's where I was trying to get at the character element. I think when you really degrade morality and you don't have a shared definition, how does anyone know what being honest looks like? Right? I don't think we even know what that means anymore. And if you lose the ability to be honest, I think I mean, that's obviously Satan's playfield, right? He loves it when people aren't being honest. I mean, I think almost anyone can come back from even being a terrible person. One person comes to mind. What was his name? John Newton. He wrote Amazing Grace and he was a slave trader. I mean, that's a
Right.
pretty gross thing to do in your past. And so I don't actually think most people have a revulsion against the concept of redemption. I think most people can understand if they're presented with it, someone who's done almost anything, but has reflected, grown, and truly, gone from caterpillar to butterfly where they're different. I
Yeah,
think that you can see and feel that,
and you can
right,
find
when
that in
it's
the
real.
Bible, right? I mean,
Oh, of course,
The
everywhere.
Bible
Yeah.
is just full of those stories, right? Just
Yeah.
full of
But
those
but what I mean
stories.
is that there's honesty in that. And what you don't see
Exactly.
is sort of what I think I find interesting because you'll see all these what is it? It's just, I feel like it's dime a dozen stories coming out now of this pastor fell for sexual impropriety or this one
Exactly.
stole funds or whatever it is. And I think that the thing we struggle with in an era that of instant gratification and knowing information really quickly is that these stories like John Newton, they require a long time span. The time between when he initially would have become sort of started his redemption arc, for example, and when he actually would have been able to present credibly to the public as being reformed is a long period of time. This doesn't
Right.
happen quickly. It doesn't happen in the spotlight either, in my view. It's not something where you get a camera and you document it. I
No.
mean, it's really slow, painful work to grow in that way. And I think that our society doesn't really reward seeing that because we're so focused on instantaneous
Well, our
knowledge and
society
gratification.
doesn't focus on work, period. Whether
Yes.
it's whether it's internal work or external work, they don't embrace it and celebrate it as it should be. Because to your point, it's just, if it's not instantaneous, if it's not a 5-second soundbite, it's not worth a shit.
Well, and that's where I think of the things I want my child to learn, for example. And one of them would have been there's a cost to everything you do. And like the more you fall into whatever pattern it is that is wrong, whatever it may be, right? It could be anything. It could be, for some people it's substances, it's sex, it's whatever it is
Whatever.
that you want, that whatever it is. I think people forget that there's a cost to redemption. Right. Redemption is very real. It's always available. I mean, I'm a Christian. I fully believe you can always turn away. There's always redemption available, but it's not cheap. Like you have to be willing to, you get what I mean? You have to pay the piper when you turn, and you have to be willing to turn. You have to be willing, the way I view that is to change the preconditions of your life. What conditions are making it such that I'm likely to fall into this pattern? Okay, now I have to change those.
Yeah.
Right. So that I'm unlikely to do that.
And then once redemption happens, you have to commit to following that path to maintain that, right? I mean,
over. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the work doesn't just stop when they sprinkle holy water on your head. It continues.
It's primarily not verbal, which is what's interesting. So this is what I've always found fascinating, and is somewhat a critique I have of the modern church as well, which is that I feel like the modern church is, might ruffle some feathers, but I feel like it is very focused on lip service in a way. You'll see people saying, well, this person's repented, or this person's done X, Y, Z. And I'm going, okay, have they repented or have they mouthed words? There's a difference. There's a difference between I've repented and I've mouthed some words. They're not the same thing. And so I just think that, again, are you willing to put your money where your mouth is? Because that's ultimately what matters long term.
Well,
what are you going to look like in 5 years?
Yeah, there's
because
a body
your
of work
actions now will get you there.
Yeah, there's a body of work that needs to follow with all of that. You actually have to walk the walk, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's where we struggle. And I think some of it is an outgrowth, I think, of misplaced Christian, or not misplaced, I would say maybe a shallow understanding of what it is to be a good person in the Christian tradition. So maybe a shallow understanding.
I would call it commercial Christianity.
Absolutely,
because it's very buy and sell, right? It is not, at least in my view, you know what?
Can I refine that? I don't think I would call it commercial. I think I would call it convenience.
Okay.
Because you're asking to receive the benefits before you've put in the work to be credible.
Exactly.
Right? That's convenience based. Like I can now say this and I'm redeemed. It's like, well, yes, but
and
it's thought about what you need to do tomorrow to show credibility in that.
Actually,
have you thought about that?
Yeah, and when using the word convenient, I was just sitting here thinking of a past sermon where all you had to do was X, and that was it. And if that isn't the label of convenience, because there was no mention of the body of work after X, right? Or what you need to be doing after X. It was, if you do X, you're done, you're good, whatever. And that's absolutely convenient, because the work is the hard part, is the absolute hard part.
Well, I think it's more credible in my view to say, I am pursuing this and I don't expect anyone to think it's real until some point in the future when it's a credible claim. Because the reality is everyone's journey is up and down. I can't think of any story from scripture or elsewhere where someone changed like that. Yeah. Right? It doesn't happen. You're going to go up and down. You're going to go up and down. That's how it works. And then at some point in the future, you've climbed the mountain, right? And then when people look at you, they can see.
It's literally one foot in front of the other. It's kind of like what you do when nobody's looking is what it amounts to. It's what you do, not when you're standing up there in front of a congregation. It's what you do when nobody's looking. That's what matters.
That's one of the things I think we've really lost touch of. And this is interesting because when you mention things like honesty, I feel like we've lost touch with what character means in a more, like I said, in a more holistic manner. Like, who are you And
Right.
that's one of the reasons I don't think it's shocking to see that we have a lot of identity conflict right now. Because having a coherent identity is character building, right? It means you understand who you are. And I think that that's a struggle for a lot of people now because it's terrifying, it's inconvenient, it's really actually difficult to build a coherent sense of self. And we don't have a lot of the venues
There's
through
not a
which
lot
you
of
inherit.
mentors out there, Leslie, that talk about the journey, right? That this is not going to happen on day one or chapter one, word one. This is the Tolstoy novel that, you're going to have to get all the way through.
Well, and the reality that sustaining your character is also work. Like you can never really get apathetic.
Right.
And that's where I think our society really struggles because I think most people now, I think life is easy for most people. I'm not saying like everyone has this easy peasy life. I just mean generally there's not the same friction there inherently was back, I don't know, decades ago to living. I think most people, especially young people who grow up in upper middle class or even middle class America,
Well,
their life isn't really
middle
hard.
class America today
Not hard.
was upper middle class several years ago.
Yes.
I mean, upper middle class. Middle class, when I was growing up, was far different than what middle class looks like now.
And what I mean is there's just not a lot of inherent challenge, I think.
No.
And I think it makes it hard. It's one of the things I feel, this is going to sound odd, but a little blessed for in my childhood was that it was so challenging. And it was not something I would ever wish on anyone. It was horrific, but there is something when you're able to get through that where you face other difficulties and frankly you go, okay, I might not be perfect in how I deal with these difficulties, and I'm never claiming I have been, but you learn how to recover from them much quicker. And you go, like I said, there's this sort of innate desire to go, okay, what am I doing now that if I look back in 5 years, I would go, why were you doing that for that long? You had
Well,
no business doing that for
the
that
other
long.
thing is you've learned how to handle the pressure of the conflict. And we've taken conflict and failure completely out of the vocabulary for the young people. They don't know what it is to fail. They don't know what pressure is anymore because everybody gets a participation trophy. So they don't know what it is to be second and not first. We've done this horrific service to the upcoming generation. And, it's my view that we need to really be working on.
I think it's interesting though, because when you think about it, it's weird. It's weird because it's such an opposite. So think of it this way. It's almost like the majority of America has the same problem that elite aristocrats used to have, which is how do you engineer a developing child's life such that they experience discomfort but not trauma?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That isn't something for most of human history anyone had to engineer because it was just hard. It was like, that's just life and you're going to experience it no matter what we do.
Exactly.
But now I think you almost have to engineer it and go, okay, I don't want you to experience trauma, but you need to.
Yeah, or put the family in a position where it's a little less comfortable than it was before. I.e., maybe scale back. Move back to rural America, move back to the farm, move back to small town USA. Those kinds of things will start that change.
Yeah, maybe we're focusing on taking, I think I love the resurgence of this idea of like health. Because I feel like people knock that movement a lot as being anti-scientific or whatever, but I actually think there's a lot of value to going, okay, well, maybe I should understand what's going on in my body. And maybe it's my responsibility to look into that. Because again, there's effort. There's something you have to work towards rather than just going to the nearest fast food place to get dinner, You're going to find this interesting. I have to mention it to you. I actually got rid of my microwave.
Oh, good for you.
And
I hate the damn things.
You know what's interesting is like one of my motivations behind it was I thought, you know what? This will encourage me to model for my son being more intentional with meals. Like if I come home, when we come home, he does not get a meal in an instant because I have to heat it up on the stove.
You got to plan. You got to plan it. You've got to cook it. You've got to shop for it, plan for it, cook it. Serve it.
And even when it's prepped, it's not instantaneous. I'm going to have to either reheat it in the oven or
Right.
reheat it on the stove. That doesn't take 30 seconds. And
Right.
I'm going, I actually think that has some value to it, to teach him it's okay for you to have to wait 5 minutes for food.
And you can have conversation while you're waiting. It's not instantaneous, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. So how's the book doing, by the way?
Oh gosh, man, I'll have to check the stats. I haven't in a while. I have you heard of there's a new podcast called Rebranding Motherhood that I was actually just on for the book.
Oh golly, I'm hurt. I thought I was your favorite.
Well, hey, you came after, so I mean,
Oh, okay.
definitely
There you go.
still a
There you
favorite.
go.
Did you
There
get
you
through the
go.
whole book?
Yeah.
Really? Really? But
Yeah.
you should leave a review on Amazon. That would be helpful because those are always helpful to boost the algorithm.
Okay.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed seeing some people. It's interesting. I've even had clients that have come in saying that they've requested me as an attorney from either reading or seeing that I wrote the book.
Good.
And so I think that's an interesting little wrinkle that I didn't really expect to come into my life. But yeah, I think that there's something about that difficulty that you mentioned that's hard now. The convenience-based, comfort-based sort of desire to fall into escapism it's interesting, isn't it? Part of what Nietzsche critiqued with nihilism, the idea, and Dostoevsky definitely critiqued this, where he basically said, I think it was him, or maybe it was a different Russian novelist that I'm getting him mixed up with, but the idea that if you give humanity too much comfort, they become destructive because there's nothing to strive for.
I think that was Dostoevsky.
I thought it was Dostoevsky, but
yeah.
it sounds like him for sure. But I do think there's an element of truth to that. And I do think about it quite a bit. Like, how do I help my son both experience discomfort, learn how to push through it without doing something harmful?
The whole conflict in Iran is a perfect example about being too comfortable and not doing the right thing. They would rather somebody with that particular ideology put together a dirty bomb or whatever and blow up Israel, blow up Europe or whatever, than actually confront the evil and do something about it.
Well, and that's interesting because when you mentioned confronting and consequence, that got me thinking about a point that I think I made a little earlier of we've really lost touch in some ways with what it is to have character and sort of stick to your guns and stick to what it is you believe. And I think the degree to which someone is willing to do that does have to do with consequence. And what I mean by that, and this is going to be an interesting point that I hope comes off the right way, is I actually think one of the reasons men historically have struggled more with fidelity in relationships is that they don't face as immediate of a consequence for that as women. So what I mean, right? I mean, if a woman was messing around, again, she can get pregnant. It's a pretty, you can't really like frame the pregnancy. You can say, well, I didn't do that. And I don't know who actually got her pregnant, but the woman is going to be pregnant out of wedlock irregardless. Right. And she's faced with the stigma and the force of the consequences that come with that. Whereas men traditionally, I think we're somewhat more shielded from that consequence. And I think that's one of the things we're missing now in a way is what consequence is there for the action you're taking that maybe you shouldn't be. And I think that's where trying to instill that in the person is important, right? And that's the whole point of the Holy Spirit and conviction in the Christian tradition, right? Is that it's instilling within you the desire for good such that when you walk away, even while you're walking away, there's an awareness, and that's what draws you back, right? Is that you go, is this really how I want to be behaving? Is this who I am? Is this what I want to become? And that's what that reroutes you back. And so I think everyone has a conscience at the end of the day, and that is a consequence in a way. But that the consequences of our actions, I think we're more shielded from it now than we used to be. Because there's so many things that shield us from cause and effect because we've, I think, more tight. We can manipulate reality more easily. Like, for example, take the trans thing. You couldn't really have been transgendered in 1800. I mean, what would you have done? You can cross-dress, but what are you going to do? You can't get prosthetics. You don't have plastic surgery. You can't take HRT. Like, this isn't going to, it's not the same ball game.
Nope,
you can't really enact it the way you can now. And there's things we can do now, I think, to shield us from cause and effect. And I don't think that's ultimately a very good thing because I think it's good to face the consequences.
It takes responsibility and accountability completely out of the equation. And that should always be in the equation. There should always be no matter which way anything goes, there should always be an accounting and a responsibility component to everything.
That's one of the profound things. And I'm not saying it's interesting. I'm very much a Christian. I don't really have strong views on what heaven and hell look like. It's interesting. I know a lot of Christians have these very different denominations and different schools of thought regarding aspects of heaven and hell. And I think my view is I don't really need that information. I'll figure it out down the line. I don't think it's something I need to know. But I do think one of the interesting things about that is the concept of Christ or God as the ultimate judge who does hold the ledger. So there's like both the grace element of your sins will be absolved, but also there will be an accounting.
Yeah.
And every single thing you've done is gonna be there. And I think that those things balance so well, because on the one hand, you're encouraged to go back. Does it make sense when you err? And you're going to, like, many times. But on the other hand, you're being told it's important what you do. You know what I mean? Like, not because that earns you like favor, but because your actions have consequences, right? There's a natural cause and effect, and that matters. And so we don't get to whitewash that, right? And the reality is certain offenses are more heinous than others from a moral standpoint. And I think we've just lost touch with a lot of that. Like, we either have a radical sort of focus, I would argue, on grace that borders on masochistic empathy, you know, where you don't really, where you're too focused on this sort of weaponized compassion in a way, which I think is more common in the sort of female progressive space. But on the other hand, you get into these stronger, I think there's a rise of this, and it's more, I think, going to come in the coming decades of maybe the manosphere that's a little more focused on like rigidity, and, you know, we do these things to a T. And I think some people hide, frankly, behind religious systems where they can say, well, I've done all the right things and now I know, that's how I know I'm good. And that's not really the point. You know, you can't hide behind it. It doesn't work like that.
Nope. So where can people find you on social media, Leslie?
Sure. Well, gosh, I'm not good at social media, but I am on X. So if you just type name in let me see, I should know this off the top of my head. I don't know my X account off the top of my head. That's bizarre. I should, because it's different than my Instagram handle, and I'm not technologically savvy here. It is at Corbly Leslie, or you can find me on Instagram at Corbly_Leslie. But if you type my name in, they're both public profiles, so it's not hard to locate me by any means. So,
well, I want to thank you personally, because it's been an absolute hoot of an hour sitting here talking to you. It's been great. But before we conclude, I want to share two scriptures. And first one's from Jeremiah 29. Is for who I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. And then from Hebrews 11 is now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And my point is, if you need guidance in all of that, all you need to do is bend your knee and pray. Then get up and work. Then get up and work. Thanks, Leslie. It's been an absolute delight.
Thank you so much for having me. A pleasure as always.
Okay.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.